Hi everyone, it's Annie, and today I'm here with my very long November wrap-up. So I participated in both Nonfiction November and IndigAThon this month, so I went a little bit overboard, like I did last year, and I read 26 books. Most of them are nonfiction or by Indigenous authors. However, there are some that I'll talk about at the end that aren't. So first I'm going to start with all of the nonfiction books, and then I'll go into the crossover books, which are both by Indigenous authors and nonfiction. And then I'll do the Indigenous authored fiction books. And then I will do the random miscellaneous books that were mostly arcs that I had to get to before their release date. So let's go. So the first book I'd like to talk about is How Stella Learned to Talk by Christina Hunger. And this is the amazing story of this dog named Stella who is able to talk about her thoughts and feelings to her owners by pressing on special buttons that let her, indicate when she wants to go outside, when she needs water, when she's hungry, and basically, tell her owners that she loves them, and it's just such a great story. I was really impressed by how much research Christina Hunger put into, helping her dog talk. And this phenomenon of talking dogs and cats has just exploded over the past couple of years on TikTok and YouTube and everywhere, and I just absolutely loved reading the original. And as a language lover, this was especially interesting to me. When I get a dog, I will absolutely be doing this. And I'll link her Instagram down below. That's where she uploads all her videos of Stella talking. I highly, highly recommend this book. It was very, very enjoyable and informative. So now I will be talking about Beautiful Country, which is a memoir about a young girl who was taken to America as illegal immigrants by her family during the 1990s from China. And it is very depressing. Really, really depressing. It took me a long time to get to, even though it's under 300 pages. It was just really hard to read because of all the struggles that she had to go through. She grew up extremely poor with her mother working in sweatshops and bouncing from all these different jobs, and you learn about her struggles in school and all of that. And it's a really, really important story to read, I believe, for everyone, especially people who live in America, and especially right now. But do just be cautious because there are some things that are hard to read in here, but nevertheless, it's very important and a great read. So next I read The Land of Lost Borders, which is about a woman who biked across the historic Silk Road trading route. I rated this, I think, 2 stars or 2.5 stars. I normally don't give low ratings to nonfiction books because, it's a real story, especially to memoirs like this, but this book just really rubbed me the wrong way. I love travel memoirs, and I thought it would be so interesting to hear about her travels throughout that part of the world, but she came across as extremely privileged and just disrespectful to the people that she was basically encroaching on. And she wrote with like an air of exoticism that was really, really uncomfortable to read. So honestly, there are other travel memoirs that are way more interesting to read. And instead of this, I recommend Winter Pastures, which is a travel memoir written by a Chinese woman, a Han Chinese woman who goes to live with Kazakh herders during the winter. And I think that is just a much better travel memoir. It's also in translation, so that's cool. To learn about that part of the world rather than from this uncomfortable perspective. And then we have The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating, which was such a wonderful breath of fresh air. It was so cute and short, like the book. I got it from my library. It was under 200 pages, which I didn't realize. It was so cute and small, and I absolutely loved this. It combines memoir with nature writing, of course, because it's about a snail, and basically the author is basically bedridden by a illness. I don't actually know what the illness is. She did mention it, but it was very long and complicated. But basically it's a chronic illness that she was fighting for years, and she's bedridden by it, and her friend one day brings her a snail that she found while walking to her house, and this snail becomes her companion, and it is just so beautiful. She researches the snail's life and learns so much about it, and it's just such a great read, very poetically written as well. I highly recommend it. And then I finally read Ace by Angela Chen. Now, this book, I have some thoughts about it. I really was prepared to give this book 5 stars, and I didn't. I gave it 4 stars. You know, it was not a bad read at all, but it came across as being there to inform other people about the ace identity rather than being written so that everyone, including aspec people, can enjoy it. It just felt very much like an educational tool instead of just like, I don't know, it wasn't what I was expecting. There were some parts of it also that really, really needed content warnings. I mean, it's kind of just unacceptable that it didn't have content warnings. So do take that into account. There are some very uncomfortable chapters that you might need to look up before you read this. But either way, if you're looking to learn more about the aspec identities and community, then this is definitely a great book to read. And next we have The Girl Who Smiled Beads. This book was powerful. This is about a girl, the author named Clementine, who survived the Rwandan genocide, and her story of being a refugee and having to escape to all these different countries, and her family life and her sister. Oh my gosh, it was just unbelievable to read. It was absolutely amazing, and she narrated the audiobook's last chapter, and that was really the most powerful chapter of them all. Her opinions are so raw, but they're also so true, and just this is one of the most powerful memoirs I have ever read. And if you enjoyed is maybe the wrong word, but if you really got something out of How Dare the Sun Rise, which is another memoir, then I highly, highly recommend you read this. This is just an amazing story that you really have to read to believe. And then I read The Five, which won the Goodreads Choice Awards for Best Nonfiction, I think a year or two ago, and it was good. I mean, I rated it 5 stars. It is about the 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper and their lives. So instead of focusing on Jack the Ripper himself, they focused on the victims, which I think was very refreshing and definitely different from other true crime books. I do think that it taught me a lot about that time period in England. I really didn't know a lot about it, and just the horrendous conditions that people were in, and the circumstances that could lead women to fall from grace and go from having, a steady, comfortable life to all of a sudden being out on the streets. It was really upsetting to read, but I think this book was really, really educational and definitely a great read if you're interested in true crime. So now we have my favorite book of the whole month, which is Disordered Cosmos. I love this book. It was so good. Okay, so this is about a Black astrophysicist who, I believe she said she's the first Black woman in America to receive a PhD in astrophysics. And she's just amazing. She opened my eyes to so many issues in both the scientific world and academia in general. She touched on race, obviously, women's rights and Indigenous rights. Her story about the telescope in Hawaii that Native Hawaiians were protesting was just absolutely amazing, and I never thought about that before. I never, it wasn't something that I ever even realized was happening, and This book was just absolutely amazing and should be required reading. It is so good. Please read this. And then lastly, I read Proud by Ibtihaj Muhammad, and she is an Olympic fencer. She's amazing. Her story was really moving, and just hearing about her setbacks that she have had because of her race and religion, being the only hijabi fencer at that time in professional fencing, I believe. And she's just an inspiration, honestly. Like, hearing about how hard she worked and everything that she had to overcome was just really, really inspiring. And reading this book made me want to work out as well. So if you need some motivation for that, this is your book. And she also narrates her audiobook, which was just awesome to read her story from her own voice. So I highly recommend this. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the crossover books, which are the nonfiction books written by Indigenous authors. First, we have Heartberries, which is a very popular memoir, and I liked it. I know I say that I am really hesitant to give out less than 5 stars to memoirs, but I had to give this one 4 stars. I really appreciated everything that she was writing about. She was very raw, very vulnerable and real about her struggles and her life, especially about her mental health. But there were just some parts of it that I couldn't stomach. There was a lot of depictions of violence. And also there was a weird part in it where she said that if dogs are stupid enough to have to survive on the streets, they should just be killed by a car instead of rescued, which really did not sit well with me. I don't really know what the point of her saying that was. So I do think this was a great book, and her writing style is definitely beautiful, but I don't know, I was expecting a little bit more from it. But then we have another memoir named Poet Warrior by Joy Harjo, who is the poet laureate, as it says here. And I bought this in one of my recent videos, which you saw. Hopefully, I'll link it up here. But this book was gorgeous. I mean, she's the poet laureate, so of course the writing style is absolutely breathtaking and amazing. And the book does include a lot of her poems as well, which was just such a treat to read. And this book is also, unfortunately, this is the reality of the situation. It's very upsetting to read some of these stories that she tells us about her life, but she's just an absolutely amazing writer, and I really do think that it is extremely worthwhile to read her new memoir. She also has another one named Crazy Brave, which I would love to read after reading this. And then I read Braiding Sweetgrass, which is amazing. An enthusiastic 5 stars for this book. This book was, from the very first line, absolutely breathtaking. The author's style of writing is so poetic and really, really vivid. She describes the nature that surrounds her in such an amazing way. It feels like I can reach out and touch it. It's just amazing, and this book is just perfect in every single way. Like, there is no fault to be found here. I learned so much about environmentalism and ecology and native plants to the Americas, and what the tagline says is Indigenous wisdom, and I loved it. And she also narrates her own audiobook, so I highly recommend listening to it. It was so calming and also really opened your eyes up to certain issues as well, and I cannot recommend this enough. And then we have A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. This is an essay collection, actually, so I read this for the collection prompt for Nonfiction November, although I didn't really do a good job of following those prompts, but it's okay. This is beautiful. The author is a Canadian First Nations woman, and so I learned a lot about First Nations, which I didn't really know about. I mean, as an American, we don't really learn about that in our schools or our history classes at all, and we learn a lot in this book. And the title references depression. So this book also really focuses on the author's mental health and her struggles with that, which was very powerful to read about. And I highly, highly recommend this book. I picked it up on a whim because the cover was beautiful, and I noticed that it would be great to read because it was Indigenous History Month. So I picked it up, and I am so glad I did. Okay, so now for the fiction and other genres of books that I read by Indigenous authors. So first we have two middle grade books. The first is Skeleton Man, and this was a really cute horror middle grade about a girl who was basically kidnapped by this skeleton man creature, and he is part of her family's Mohawk legends, and it was just an amazing little story. It was so good, very short, but definitely very creepy. And the sequel, The Return of the Skeleton Man, I did give 3 stars. I gave the first one 5 stars. The third one, I mean, it was good, it was fine. I just didn't really think it needed to exist. I think the first one left off just fine, and you know, it was good. I mean, the main character is this little girl, and she's very strong and very, very interesting to follow and hear her thoughts, but I don't know, it just fell a little flat to me because I enjoyed the first one so much more than I expected. But if you're looking for a fun horror middle grade to read, definitely check these out. And then another middle grade I read was Race to the Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. And this follows 7th grader, I think, Najoni, and she is such a great character. She can see monsters. So this boss comes, he just like promoted or hired her dad for something, and he comes and she realizes like, oh my god, he's a monster, and she has to like deal with this, and I loved it. I loved it. It was such a magical adventure, so fun and heartwarming, and I just can't recommend it enough. It was so good. And then I read A Snake Falls to Earth by Darcy Little Badger, who is the author of Alatsue. So if you followed my channel, you know that I did not really enjoy Alatsue that much. I gave it 3 stars when I first read it. You know, it was fine, but this book, really good. This book also has an ace main character, which I love and super appreciate that Darcy Little Badger has all of her main characters be ace. Like, thank you. This was such an amazing, really highly original story. She follows 2 perspectives in this story. One is a cottonmouth snake named Ollie, who lives in the like animal spirit world, which is removed from Earth, and the story starts with him basically being kicked out by his mom to go and make a life for himself on his own. So you follow him in his journey, and then you also follow the main character, who is a Lipan Apache girl who is dealing with her grandmother who is having health issues, and there are a lot of issues that she faces actually. And I don't want to give anything away because I went into this really knowing nothing about it, but it's kind of speculative, kind of, I don't know, it's kind of its own genre actually, and I really enjoyed it, and I don't think this should be overlooked at all. If you enjoyed Alatsue, please read this next book of hers. And then I read Firekeeper's Daughter. I rated this 3.5 stars. I went into it with really high expectations. I think that kind of made me a little bit disappointed with it at the end, but I still really enjoyed this book. The main character is a very interesting girl to follow, and her family situation and everything is really interesting to read about. However, the main plot point of the book, well, one of the main plot points of the book, is a fake dating situation that just really did not make any sense to me at all. Like, it would not happen in real life. I really did not like that part of it, and it was a big part of the book. The other part of the book, like the main plot, is that she is that she is asked by the FBI to help kind of root out the source of this new strain of meth that is being created in her community. And that was interesting. She had a lot of interesting social commentary there, especially about drug use on reservations. And she is a very interesting main character. She is half white and half Indigenous, so she has a lot of interesting feelings about that. And you see her, she is unenrolled, so you see how that affects her life and her feelings. She's a great character, but the fake dating thing and the romance really threw me off. It just didn't work for me. And then we have another short, cute little book called Two Old Women. First of all, I love this cover. I read this for the IndigAThon prompt, read a book with an elder protagonist. And this book retells an Alaskan Native legend about two old women who, during a very hard winter, were basically cast out of their group and their families and basically left to die because they didn't have enough food to support them. So instead of succumbing and accepting their fate, these two old women kind of work together and survive, and they end up being triumphant, and it is really, really heartwarming and a very strong book with strong morals, and I loved it, and I am so glad I decided to pick it up. And then I read a poetry collection called What the Chickadee Knows. This was a recommendation by one of the IndigAThon creators, who of course I will have linked all of them down below, so you can check them out. But this poetry collection was so amazing. The poet, Margaret Newden, is a teacher of her native Indigenous language, Anishinaabemowin, and the poems in this book are both in Anishinaabemowin and English, which is just so cool. As a language nerd and linguist, I absolutely love that. I was so happy to see that. That was so cool. So you get the poem on one side of the page in Anishinaabemowin and then in English, and that was so cool to see. And her poems, of course, I only understood the English versions, but her poems were absolutely beautiful, and just she described nature in such a breathtaking way. This poetry collection is one of my favorites that I have ever read. Maybe it's my favorite of all time. It was just so amazing and supremely underrated. So please, if you're looking for a really, really great nature poem book to read, don't look any further. This is your choice. And then I read Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson, who's another First Nations author, and this book blew me away. 5 stars. It was amazing. It was written in a really unique style where it kind of jumps a lot around in the timeline, but it worked. You know, it wasn't confusing at all, and you follow the main character who is dealing with the aftermath of her brother being missing from a boating accident, and he's presumed dead, and she goes to look for him. And in the midst of that, in between all of this, you see her thoughts about her life in the past and all of the struggles that she has dealt with, and it was breathtaking. It was so good. I totally understand why everybody who's read this on Booktube has such glowing reviews of it. It is really, really worth it. And then lastly for IndigAThon, I read Stephen Graham Jones' new book, My Heart is a Chainsaw. I loved it. This is one of my favorite books I've read this month. 5 stars. I loved it. It's so good. I don't understand why people are saying that it's not as good as The Only Good Indians. I liked this way better. I don't know. It was so good. It follows an amazing main character named Jade. She is just so amazing and one of the most unique characters I have ever read. I think my problem with The Only Good Indians is that I didn't really feel like the characters were that well fleshed out, or I didn't connect with them at all, but Jade, oh my god. She was so cool. So she is a half-native girl who lives with her abusive father, and I loved it. She's obsessed with slasher films, and she basically is under the impression that in her town a slasher film is going to happen. Like, not a film, but like a real-life slasher incident. And it is scary in like a suspenseful way, and you learn, oh, I don't want to give anything away because there are some really, really great twists in there, but Stephen Graham Jones has not disappointed with this book. This is an amazing, amazing book. Please read it. Okay, so now onto the random fiction books that I read. First, I read Emma, which I gave 5 stars. I really liked it. And if you saw my Jane Austen ranking video, you can see my thoughts about it there. I won't go too much into it. I'll just say that I really enjoyed it, and I thought Emma's character was really interesting to read about. Next, I read the arc that I had of The Cat Who Saved Books by Sosuke Natsukawa, and this is in translation, and it was a cute kind of YA coming-of-age story about a high school boy whose grandfather, who was his guardian, suddenly passes away, and he inherits his grandfather's old bookshop, and he is visited one day by this weird talking cat who enlists his help in protecting books. And it was cute. It was a fantasy book. There was a bit of a romance in there, which I was like, eh. But it was overall cute. I just felt like the themes that it was trying to get across were a little bit muddied and unclear. And also, it was so short. It was about 200 pages, so it was kind of hard to feel connected with the characters in that short amount of time. But all in all, it was a very quick and cute read. And then another arc I had was Our Violent Ends by the one and only Chloe Gong. This is the end of the duology of These Violent Delights, set in Shanghai in the 1920s, following Roma Montkov and Juliet Tsai, and oh, it was so good. I've seen some people be a little bit disappointed about this, but I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars, just like I gave the first one, and I thought it was really good. It was very long. It was over 500 pages, and I don't think it needed to be, but I liked the character development that we got, and especially about these side characters. We got a lot of development there, which I really liked, and apparently is setting up Foul Lady Fortune, which is Chloe Gong's next book. So all in all, I really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to reading Chloe Gong's next books. And then the last arc that I read was my favorite, and one of my favorite reads of the month. This was a great reading month. I think my average rating was like 4.5 or something, my highest of the whole year. I read Beasts of a Little Land. Oh my god, it was so good. It was so good. This is a historical fiction novel about the Japanese occupation of Korea. Who was surprised? That's what I love to read about. I love that period of history. This was so amazing. First of all, from the very first line, the writing style was beautiful. The descriptions that she uses, oh my god, it was so good. It follows 2 main perspectives, one of a girl named Jade who is training to become a courtesan, and one of a boy named Jungho who is basically a street orphan who turns into a gang member, and you're following their personal lives while also seeing this backdrop of resistance and protests and for Korean independence from Japan, and it was so good. I cannot recommend this enough, please. I love this book so much. If you liked Pachinko, definitely read this. You're gonna love it. It was so good. I've read a lot of books about this period in Korean history, and this is my favorite, hands down. Thank you guys so much for watching and sticking with me through this very long wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know down in the comments below what your favorite read of November was, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'll see you next time for another bookish video. Bye!